And to help us make sense of what we're seeing and what we are not, Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute and Chairman of Asia Narratives, joins us on the show. Good morning, Einar. Let's start with what Xi Jinping wants to project. Unity and defiance seems to be at the core of that. Do you feel he's succeeded? We know it was enough to annoy President Trump, for him to send a sarcastic message.
Well, as far as Trump's concerned, once again, it's a throwback to his earlier days when the cool kids are at the party and he's not invited. In terms of defiance, I would put it slightly differently. Remember, China suffered a century of humiliation because it did not have the ability to defend itself. You had European nations literally going in and carving up China so that they could sell drugs to it. And then you had the Japanese invasion. So it's very important to the Chinese people that they have the ability to defend themselves. It signals that they are independent and that the gains of the revolution, New China, have been consolidated.
And beyond this parade, do you think the show of trilateral unity could evolve into a more formal geopolitical bloc, perhaps? I mean, what holds the three leaders together? What could drive them apart? And is there any real I suppose, long-term strategic coherence between the leaders?
Liz, I mean, there's a number of things, but they depend on your point of view. Obviously, Putin is anxious to show the world that Russia has not been harmed by Western sanctions. Kim Jong Un, you'll note, he brought his daughter along with him. I think he's been trying for quite some time to get global attention to the fact that he wants a recognition of a normalized North Korea, albeit a nuclear one. And he's saber rattling because he would like to see formal boundary talks created. I don't know where they will lead, but certainly it's clear that he wants an independent nation. He gave up on this notion of a unified Korea. And as I said, this is his perspective. From China's perspective, this is not so much about just these powers. Everyone's concentrating on the optics of this, but the fact is you had almost every single nation in the world represented there except, the G7, Japan and South Korea. So you have a kind of a splintering going forward between the Belt and Road Initiative, this parade, SCO, and BRICS. You see a convergence of not only interests, but also in terms of the messaging that's being put across. Very similar words coming out on all three of those major organizations, leading to this idea that China is proposing a new kind of world order based on this idea that every country has to be secure and that security cannot depend on the insecurity of others. There needs to be a path to development. And finally, there needs to be respect for the sovereignty of existing nations, which are often complex mosaics due to the fact of the arbitrariness of history, but also the lines drawn by colonial powers in the past.
Einar, are you surprised at how quickly this has all come together for China's move to fill the vacuum and uncertainty left by America's withdrawal, from global norms and global institutions? It's really been only 7 months.
Well, you're talking about 7 months of Donald Trump. So I think the impetus has to be on what Donald Trump is doing. He's made the world less certain, firing off 180 letters saying that you're going to put tariffs on them, including to some very confused penguins, indicates a level of, non-normative behavior that the world is still trying to digest, trying to decide if 3.5 years more of Donald Trump is part of a new norm, kind of a pendulum swing where the bookends have been moved, or it's an aberration. But definitely what has been happening has made people feel insecure. You're seeing countries de-risk. It's not necessarily that they want to run into the arms of other nations, China, etc. But who's proposing the best model for running the world? Is it about extractive powers that use their might to make you, in essence, a vassal state? Or do you want a multipolar world, which is going to be messy, but it's going to have to adopt some sort of principles and values if it's going to get along.
Yeah. I know we've talked so much also about, the sort of weaponry that was displayed, Was it also perhaps a sales pitch from China that, it had the tech and weapons that it could sell too, and thus taking that rivalry with the U.S. another notch higher? I mean, the U.S. has one of national security concerns with China tech, but it doesn't mean that Beijing will not have interested buys. We know Myanmar purchases from them.
Yeah, I don't think so. Put it this way, Liz. Do you want to sell the capabilities that could be used against you? The U.S. has been doing this for years, and you'll note that in a lot of the hot conflicts, it's U.S. weaponry that are being used against U.S. forces or proxies. This is not a good long-term solution. Is China offering a different perspective on warfare? Absolutely, simply because they're trying to figure out how to defend themselves. Notice the push is towards missiles and drones, in particular, electronic warfare, the ability to bypass submarines by having submersible unmanned vehicles, a lot less expensive, a lot harder to detect. So these are all issues that China has said we need these to protect ourselves, to make sure we don't go back to the past humiliations. But I don't know that it's necessarily going to be sending this around the world because, as I said, they're well aware of the U.S. history in regards to this arms sales.
I know some analysts, were saying before Kim made an appearance at the parade that the China-North Korea relationship may have soured, but he showed up, we know that, with his daughter, Ju A. So can you tell us what that's saying about, first of all, his relationship with Xi Jinping, but also about his overall long-term intentions, including, I guess, succession plans?
Well, clearly, I mean, it's not bring your daughter to work day, so he's sending a clear message that he wants a familial line of rulers within North Korea. He sees that as obviously beneficial to his own career and ideas for his family, but also at the heart of North Korea. So that's his perspective. Now, in terms of the rather complex relationship between China, Russia, and North Korea, the fact that North Korea has opened up a substantial relationship with Russia, obviously sending troops to Ukraine, is actually made it easier for him to have a more productive relationship with China. There's always been fears in North Korea that China had them monopolized because of border issues, etc. And now they feel they have choices, therefore they're not boxed in. It's a lot easier for them to get over a kind of natural paranoia which has developed since the Korean War.
Yeah, I just want to also zoom in a little bit more on the Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin meeting on the side, where the North Korean leader openly pledged military support for Russia to Russia. How might this deepen the strategic alignment between Moscow and Pyongyang? And how does China fit into this evolving dynamic? And by doing so, does Beijing risk being dragged into their conflicts? And perhaps how this could affect its negotiating position with the U.S. when it comes to tariffs? I mean, looking at India as an example.
Well, I think you have to differentiate there. I mean, the interests of North Korea and Russia right now are of the moment. It's very convenient to send troops to the front because then they don't have to be fed and armed and clothed and things like that. In essence, certain that there's financial remuneration going on. And that's easier. North Korea is not in the best of shape economically. They are looking for help to normalize their situation. China is not interested in sending its troops anywhere except peacekeeping missions, and you saw that clearly at the parade, where the peacekeepers were given a separate and very distinct role for their cooperation, which is over 50% of the peacekeepers that are being used by the UN. So there's always going to be a divergence of interest. Right now, it's in the moment. Russia is fighting with Ukraine. North Korea is helping them. They've formed a relationship. Is this going to be the norm going forward? I doubt it. This would label them as aggressive entities that are willing to come together to fight against others. They would rather leave that to the U.S.
All right, Einar, we will have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for the fascinating insights. Einar Tangen is a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and also chair of Asia Narratives.